Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. Elderly woman. She had hurt her arm. A serious injury, a headache, a stabbing heart. Coming, replied a woman in a white coat. She was in her early 30s. Neat nails and medium-length hair, not overweight but not thin, medium height. Expressive blue eyes, snub nose. Sarah was an active woman. She fought for all challenges, even if they were beyond her shift. Wherever there was trouble, she jumped up, dropped everything, and went to help. Some said she was a workaholic. Others called her an upstart. But the head of the emergency room said Sarah was a doctor from God. They don't have those anymore. And as she sat in the stuffy ambulance, she quietly gazed out the window at the scenery. The part of town she was assigned to began with the private sector. First came the upscale cottages. That was where the superintendent himself came on calls. He had friends living there. Friends of friends and friends of friends and friends of friends. In fact, Evan himself dreamed of moving there one day. Except he didn't know how to take bribes, and he wasn't accustomed to stealing. Where the elite real estate ended, there were a few old 5-story buildings, and behind them, the private sector full of broken ruins which were kept on the word of honor of the mayor of the city, from a good old poem. Who did people have more confidence in? No one had believed the mayor's promises for a long time. The road was paved but beaten. Where people live on the ground, heavy machinery is often used. It instantly cripples any asphalt. A new road was paved, but several heavy trucks immediately mangled it, leaving dents. The ambulance was shaking, but the driver relentlessly pressed the gas pedal. He was determined to get there before the old woman bled to death. As the car shook on the battered road, Sarah thought back on her life. She rarely let herself do that. But on that rainy October day, she just couldn't help but think of John. They had met when it was also overcast outside the windows of medical school. Both were in their first year of medical school. Both had gone there to save lives. John was the most serious in their class, and Sarah was the most serious in their class, and Sarah was the prettiest. They had long looked at each other since September, but never once spoke. Sarah looked out the window that day and watched John run through the puddles to the university in his stretchy sweater he'd inherited from his father. No, he'll never pay attention to me. I'm too stupid and boring for a guy like that, Sarah thought at the time. The guy ran up to the classroom she was in and, out of breath, stopped in the doorway. "Where is everybody?" he asked, barely breathing. Sarah shrugged her shoulders in embarrassment. "Nobody's here anymore. The professor got sick right in the rain yesterday and came down with a fever. Everyone's gone." John took a few steps forward. He too was wet through and through. Wow, how ironic. The man who was going to teach us how to heal people got sick himself. Sarah smiled. "I guess I can too." Now John appeared. Sarah held out her sweatshirt to him. "Here, take it. If you take off your wet clothes and put on your dry ones, you might not get sick." He shook his head. "If I walk the halls of the university in a woman's sweatshirt, it will be worse than getting sick." "That's all right. I'd rather get sick. You'll learn how to heal people on me," he said manfully. Of course, he got sick after that incident, and Sarah brought him oranges in the dormitory. That's how they started communicating. It wasn't until the end of his freshman year that John got into a fight with Sarah's friend. He got jealous and asked her to be his girlfriend. Their relationship began. Sarah smiled as she remembered those events. How sweet had it been to spend days and nights with him. But was it about him? Now it seemed to her that it had been good. Just knowing that there was someone who loved her and would not let her get hurt. "Hold on, Sarah. The road is bad," the driver told her. She nodded. "I picked up the errand with my fingers." The shaking got worse. She remembered how their life together had begun. John had a mother who actively interfered in their relationship, but the guy managed to make sure Sarah didn't feel uncomfortable. Of course, Mom, Sarah knows how to cook everything. She's just a great hostess. We'll get some cutlets. Come over tonight, he would say to her on the phone. And then he would hang up and turn to Sarah. She would stand behind him with her arms folded across her chest. It takes forever to make cutlets. It takes mincemeat to twist. I only have meat in the freezer, Sarah said, angry that her mother-in-law to be was trying to test her on all fronts. What's with the cutlet testing? Don't think about it, mind your own business. The cafe across the street makes wonderful homemade cutlets. I'll buy them there, and now I'll make them myself. You know I'm better at whipping it, Sarah said. John kissed her on the forehead and got down to business. John was resourceful and adventurous. That's probably why he was quickly promoted in his job. But that was much later. First, they went to college together for 6 long years. Then they went through boarding school under the great and terrible Evan, the head doctor at the hospital. Now he had gone to head the emergency room. The elite went to work for him, too. And back in those days after college, they were all together at the city hospital. And Evan became a mentor to Sarah and John and the other guys. They got married in their senior year. They'd lived together for a long time, and John's mom had come to terms with it. Sarah realized she was delayed and rushed to make her beloved happy. The relationship had been through fire, water, and brass by then. There had been arguments and breakups, but they still stayed together. Sarah tried to get pregnant, but she couldn't. Of course, she didn't particularly want to. But it was at that moment that she decided that a child would help them regain their former love. She missed the care and affection she had seen from John at the beginning of their relationship. He no longer met her when she went out late at night, gave her no gifts, and was all about work. John had graduated from college with honors, and Sarah had earned a regular degree. They had fundamentally different approaches to learning and to life. But Sarah realized this only now when she saw where life's roads had led them. They were not originally on their way. John had studied to have regalia. He was so nervous before his graduation, so afraid he wouldn't get the red crown that would be his crown at that point in his life. But he got it. Managed to do it partly by stealth, partly by bribery. The knowledge, of course, was there too. Sarah, on the other hand, was learning the material because she was going to use that knowledge later in her life. She understood it differently. She needed to know everything because without it she wouldn't save anyone. For her, learning the material was a matter of life and death. They were admitted to the hospital, but Sarah was praised more than John, with his red professor and chief medical officer diploma. It was impossible to fool the professor. He could see where it was real and where it was ostentatious. John was freaking out at the time. Sarah, on the other hand, tried to smooth things over. "I'm pregnant," she declared a few months after they got interesting. He was confused, and she could see that the news wasn't so good for him. "Aren't you glad?" asked Sarah. "Glad, of course I am. Then you and I need to apply to the registry office. Are you sure about that?" From there, things got mixed up. Sarah went to doctors, but the pregnancy was not confirmed. Only one test worked. The others came back negative. "So are you pregnant or not?" John asked. Sarah folded her arms across her chest. "I don't know. The doctors say if you are pregnant, it's still early. Take a blood test. The blood will tell you everything." "I did. Don't worry so much. If I'm not pregnant, then we'll part and that's it." "You were scared, weren't you?" "I can see that. I thought you wanted a baby, but you're not pregnant. Or are you cheating? Do you want to get married? Say so." To her, his words were like a slap in the face. She started to pack her things, but John wasn't ready to break up. He stopped her. They fell asleep together. When Sarah woke up, he wasn't home. She didn't know where he might have gone on Sunday morning on their only day off. John returned closer to lunchtime with a bouquet of flowers, a ring, and a bag of groceries. "I want you to be my wife. It doesn't matter if you're pregnant now or not. We're going to have children. Forgive me for yesterday. It was all nerves, work. Sarah was happy. The nervous tension had subsided, and her body was functioning normally. Already in the evening, she realized that she was not pregnant. John, upon hearing the news, hugged her. First of all, don't worry. That's how we're going to handle everything. And second of all, I'm really glad. Right now, pregnancy is out of the way. You need to get a foothold in your job. It's important to get through boarding school and get a place in this outpatient clinic. It's a good place. The two of us will be working in adjoining offices. A family couple, and you and I will still be together. We'll apply tomorrow. I want you to have confidence in me, honey. After these words, Sarah melted. She no longer tried to hasten conception. Things went their way, but the relationship was no longer the same. They were both working. Sarah was praised more and more often, and she was more likely to give the right answers, to make the right diagnosis. John was hurt by this. She saw it. But don't pretend to be stupid just so your man won't be so hurt. They had a modest wedding. Her mother-in-law started talking about buying an apartment. Sarah had some savings, enough for a down payment at most. Mom has money for an apartment, but not enough to get a good one. Let's you and me make it together. I've saved a little too. We'll just do the repairs at my mom's place. One condition. She's afraid we'll develop and we'll have to share the place. And this way they'll register it for themselves. And when she's gone, you and I get everything. It's just a formality, you know. Sarah shook her head. It has to be our apartment to live in. We'll divorce her. We'll divide it like we're supposed to, she said. It's not like we're going to get a divorce. I'm the only one at my mom's. You know, there are no other heirs. So let her do as she wants. All the more reason for her to contribute more. No, you and I can refuse. Take your money and my money and take out a mortgage. But by paying a huge amount of money, as much as the apartment itself will cost. You see, Sarah nodded. She gave all her money, but it still wasn't enough for what John had chosen. He found a great option near the hospital. Take out a bigger loan so you have enough for repairs. I do it myself, but I can't get much. I got a car loan. You understand, he said. John bought himself a license and a car, fulfilled his dream, on credit, of course. Sarah was against it. He needed to think about a place to live first, but he insisted, and she, as usual, gave in. Sarah took out a loan for the apartment. The mother-in-law took care of it. Sarah and John were only registered there. Everything seemed fair. They paid the loan together, graduated from boarding school, and became a therapist in adjoining offices. And a lot of people were jealous. Beautiful couple married. They had their own place. He'd take her home in his car. Except in reality, the relationship grew colder and colder. A year after buying the apartment, Sarah began to find little clues that John was having an affair. The bells were ringing every day. I'm going to be late tonight. I met the boys. I'll be back later. Smells like perfume. The patient was being examined. She was wearing too much perfume. Several times he didn't sleep at home, but he reacted keenly to his wife's questions. I've never given a reason to doubt myself. You offend me with your distrust and people are ashamed. After another 6 months, she began to be told openly, your John was standing outside the hospital last night with our Laurel. And then she got into his car, your car. Everyone was already buzzing about them having an affair, and you just didn't want to see anything. It was getting harder and harder to trust. Sarah was asking questions. John was angry. She was desperate, didn't know what to do, how to hold him back. It was Laura. She was a real beauty, like from the cover. Sarah didn't know if it was true or not. After all, John denied everything. Who would she trust? She decided she would trust her husband. But even if he did have an affair, so what? They all do. But he was married to her. She thought she'd forgive him, that they'd get over it. But one day she came home early from her shift. She opened the door with her key, thinking John wasn't home. He was going to check in. His mother that day, she told him not to call because they would be cleaning out her pantry. Sarah was numb from the threshold. There were shoes standing there, her shoes standing there, her shoes. Sarah could already tell by the sound of it. Her office was just next door. John heard the front door open and ran out into the hallway. "Sarah, it's not like that, don't worry. We didn't have anything. Look, I can explain. She's just going through a rough patch. She's divorcing her husband." Sarah knew the woman was divorced. "And did you comfort her in her underwear?" she asked. "No. She gave me a massage, and that was it. I'm just her friend, after all." At that moment, she came out of their shared bedroom, beautiful, slender, in her silk robe over her body. Sarah felt a noise in her ears. John realized he couldn't get away with it. Sarah just went out and cried all day in the square across the street from the house. When she returned, John confessed everything. "I'm going to leave her." "Let's start everything." Her husband spoke first, and Sarah knew she couldn't forgive. How to live with him now. No divorce. John left temporarily for a friend's house. He decided to give her time to think, but Sarah filed for divorce right away. He begged her to stay, cried, gave her flowers, but she took nothing from him. Everyone at the hospital said, "Hold on to him, don't give him to your mistress. Forgive him, he loves you so much." But Sarah knew she couldn't. He had ruined everything. When she signed the divorce papers, John's mother came to her. "Do you want a divorce? Leave. I'll talk my son into it and he'll sign the document. But you won't get the apartment. Pack your things and go. And John will come back here. We bought this place. Your contribution was very small, and you've already lived it out here." Sarah packed her things the same day. She left everything there, taking only her loan documents. She paid it later on her own. The resentful man began to hate his ex-wife. He broke up with his beautiful mistress, and she never let him near her again. He sat between two chairs. He told Sarah to pay off her loan. It wasn't his problem now. After all, she had turned him down, and Sarah didn't talk to him anymore. John resented her and started gossiping, defiantly humiliating her. The work became unbearable. Everyone looked at her with sympathy, and the former mistress of her husband kept turning around in front of her eyes. So when her beloved boss and head of the boarding school had already said he was leaving to go to the emergency room, Sarah asked to go with him. He heard about what had happened in their family. Everyone at the hospital knew about it. Every first person there is a gossip. He took her with him, and she worked there ever since. Everything came back to normal. The wounds healed. The loan paid off. But ever since then, she's been all alone and living in a rented apartment. The ambulance finally stopped, interrupting another cycle of memories. Sarah, as if waking up, stepped outside. It was raining, freezing cold, and sprinkling more and more coarse droplets. The sky was ink. "It's me. I called for you," shouted her grandmother, running away from the house. Sarah noticed that her arm was bandaged. The bandage was soggy in the rain, but Grandma held out her hand to be examined right there on the street. "Let's go inside and I'll have a look at you," Sarah said. Granny looked at her suspiciously and reluctantly stepped inside. Sarah thought she just didn't trust people. There must have been occasions in her life. She entered the house, crashing at the threshold, and placed the medicine case on the table. "And watch out for the mistress," Sarah said. Grandma wasn't quite sure why she'd called the doctor. "There's no need to stitch. A cut like that will heal on its own. I'll put a bandage on it now that you're here," she said. Grandma nodded. "So how did you cut it?" Sarah asked simply out of politeness. The patient was silent, as if creating awkwardness and tension. While her grandmother was gathering her thoughts, Sarah heard a distinct male moan, as if somewhere nearby in the next room. She quickly shifted her gaze to her patient, and she became visibly nervous. "And I cut the meat, honey." "So cut," she smiled. Sarah responded with a smile and nodded to her as a new groan was suddenly heard. Sarah looked up again at the patient. She looked down as if nothing had happened. When the bandage was ready, Sarah looked her grandmother straight in the eye and said, "I heard the moaning. And you saw that I heard it. What's going on here? If this person is in pain, I have an obligation to help. That's why I came to you. Trust me, please." The grandmother waved her hand. "Go, my daughter, go. Just leave me the painkillers. I must have hurt a nerve. My arm hurts a lot. And there's no moaning. The house is old. It melts and creaks. It scares me sometimes myself," said the grandmother, seeing that her words were not convincing. Sarah, the doctor, did not get up from her seat. "I promise to keep it a secret if you let me help," Sarah pronounced. The hostess sighed. "Just promise." "I promise I won't go anywhere," Sarah assured her. The grandmother went to the back of the room, pushed back and opened the cellar. Sarah, going downstairs, turned on the light. There was a level bench in the dirty concrete room. On it lay a young man, covered in blood. He had short hair under a hedgehog. He was smart, good-looking, somewhat like Tom Cruise, only bigger and taller. "What happened?" Sarah asked. "A bear tore," she replied, as she helped the stranger upstairs, while the landlady hurriedly closed the curtains. The doctor washed and stitched up the wounds. The man almost screamed in pain, but did not stop her from doing her job. Afterwards, she stitched him up and gave him pills: antibiotics, painkillers, and antipyretics. The man told her that he escaped from prison, but that he was not guilty. He swore and swore in a half-conscious state that he had not committed the crime for which he was imprisoned. His grandmother laid him on the bed in the bedroom and went to see the doctor. "Did you cut your hand on purpose so you could call me in and get the medicine?" Sarah guessed. "Of course. Everybody's looking for that kid. Gave the pharmacy an order to question everyone, search them. Who's going to get bandages, painkillers? His picture's all over the place. And I believe him. Those idiots in uniform put my son in jail for nothing. Don't kill him, honey. I've seen life. I know the difference between thugs and innocents. This guy's almost a saint. You could pray for him, and they put him away. The real criminals are in shoulder straps, in offices and leather chairs," Grandma said. Sarah was confused, but once she promised, she had to keep her word. "I won't address it. You just make sure the neighbors don't notice anything," she said as she got in the car. "What was in there?" The driver asked Sarah. The old lady seemed to run out on her own feet. Then I look. A curtain held her up. Wasn't she harboring a fugitive? Well, I'll say. He heard from the prisoners. Probably everybody heard but her. It was necessary to take suspicion off this house from the landlady. Sarah grinned. "Yeah." She started complaining about women's issues. "Let me show you what I've got here," she said. I said, "I need a chair. I don't see anything here." I sent her to the doctor, but she closed the curtains anyway and started showing me her moles on her chest. I'm no expert, of course, but I looked. The driver grinned, started the engine, and the car immediately shook. The rain drummed on the roof, the headlights illuminating the already dark street. Sarah was terribly scared, but she seemed to get away with it this time. If only her chauffeur Shurik would believe her story. 3 days later, Sarah found herself outside this very house again. She had come to check on the man. She was scared for him. The wounds were very serious. He simply might not have survived. There was no telling how much blood he had lost. Besides, he was a prisoner, and it was important for Sarah to know that not only was he okay, but that the lady of the house was okay as well. Her grandmother opened the door for her with a smile, and Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. "Come in, daughter." "Come on in, sweetheart. Thank you so much. You kept your promise. No one bothered us, and Archie's better. He's already on the mend." Sarah entered the house again and saw the same man at the table. He was eating soup. Seeing her, Archie jumped to his feet. "You're back. Thank you for not turning me in. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Much better. Already the stitches are itching." "That's good, but it's too early to take it off." She looked both at him and at her grandmother's self-inflicted wound, and as soon as they had the guts, they came up with the idea. But I guess there really was no other way out in their situation. "It's okay, the wound is healing." "I'll go." Sarah rose from her seat, but Archie stopped her. "I'll walk you out." They walked out into the courtyard, and Archie felt like repenting. He told her his whole story. "It's just the way it was. I ran with my son to this grandmother's house. Maria took me in for a reason. We were being chased. Arnold, her son, told me where to run. When we walked through the woods, her house was already being searched. Arnold warned them that they would search her house first, but they wouldn't find her, because we weren't going directly. We weren't running into town, but out of town, along another road through the woods. There's a track there that you can take to the outskirts and get to Maria, and everything would have been fine. But the dogs picked up our trail, and in the woods we were attacked by a bear. I covered myself with Arnold and was wounded. I blacked out. When I woke up, he was dead. The bear had got him. He thought I was dead and didn't touch him. Arnold wasn't so lucky. I left him there and moved on. I don't even know how to tell her. She found me on her doorstep in the morning, barely alive, and gave me some herbs. She treated my wounds with what she had. Police never came again, but she still hides me under the floor. You can't go to the drugstore. The police are on duty. The pharmacists were told to report. If anyone takes what you gave me to cure my wounds, they must have found blood in the woods and guess we were badly hurt. May I speak for you? He asked. Sarah nodded. Thank you. And I want you to know, it wasn't my fault after all. And neither was Arnold's. He got in a fight for a girl, stood up for her, and the local farmer's son put him in jail for it, so that he wouldn't have to beat up any bourgeois faces. For nothing. I mean, the guy was in jail, and my story's even worse. Worked in a rich man's house. Or rather, Betty's girlfriend's parents were rich. Betty and I became very good friends, but I never liked her husband. He never liked her husband. He never liked me either. Betty was very nice, quiet, and intelligent. I was a janitor cleaning the pipes in the house, doing chores. In general, all manly things. If the drain was busted, I repaired it. In the summer, I did the garden, mowed the lawn, took their dog to the vet. They took me there by chance. I'm an orphan myself. The director of the orphanage recommended me. He was an old friend of Betty's parents. They're dead now, so she took me in. John, her husband, never said anything bad, but he always looked at me funny. I thought he was jealous, but it was nothing like that. Betty's like a sister to me, I understand. Colleagues are like that. I know. One also liked to look obliquely. Sarah sighed, remembering her ex-husband. After the divorce, which he really wanted. John had eaten her up, never missed an opportunity to hurt her, to humiliate her, to gossip, and the stares were more than she could count. Fortunately, after the transition to the station near to hospital, Sarah forgot about him, and a few years have not heard anything about her ex-husband. One morning, Archie continued, I found Betty dead. She had supposedly fallen out the window. At first it was said by accident. Then they found signs of a struggle. John said he wasn't home, but I don't know what really happened. I had my own converted little house of 20 squares, but I had enough to live in. I was there all night and didn't even go out all night. John ended up saying that I was in love with Betty, that I was hitting on her, that I was hitting on her. That never happened, and they put me away. They charged me with the full extent of the law. They gave me enough to make it count. My life was over. So I chose to run away with the same poor guy. Prison is a very hard place to live in. In addition to people like you and me, simpletons, fools, there are a lot of those who are not in prison by mistake. And they are very aggressive, angry. I only put up with it for 8 months. I couldn't. Vanya was given more than that. But one guy had a grudge against him. He was afraid he would not live to see the end of his sentence and ran away. But you can't escape death, so he was destined to perish. Will you tell her? She asked. I will, of course. And I will show her his grave in the woods. It's not that far from here. I carried him in my arms while I had the strength. But the rays bled and I was quickly without strength. I had to bury him right there. I found a shovel and dug a grave for many hours. I could not leave him. There. You can't. The animals wouldn't leave a trace. You kept a friend in that condition, too. Sarah was horrified. I had to. That's all right. The main thing is to help Maria through her grief. Sarah looked at the fugitive and didn't understand why she liked him so much. Proper, soulful. Except he had an unhappy fate. What are you going to do then? How are you going to live if you're wanted? At that moment a noise was heard. Our people didn't have time to say anything. Suddenly armed men burst into the yard. Archie was arrested. Sarah cried and swore she didn't call the police. It was your driver who was conscientious. Called us our people, guarded the yard for days. But until today the fugitive was not seen. But he came out to see you off. Apparently you then assisted, took part in harboring the criminal. The man in uniform. Here, too, Archie, who was lying on the ground in handcuffs, stepped in. She didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. Said I was a hiker. A bear ripped me up in the woods, and they took me in. Maria let me stay, and they didn't know anything. Sarah was so confused, terrified. She didn't know what to say. She only nodded. Sarah, then, the police officer pronounced, reading her passport. Archie turned around and looked at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. Yes, that's my last name by my husband. Wow, what a coincidence, he pronounced. And your patient was just doing time for the murder of a woman. He knows her last name, too. Maybe he wanted to kill you, too. You'd be more careful, wouldn't you? Does your driver read it? Is your driver read it? He knows the city's on alert. They haven't found one yet, the landlady's son. And the other one you're treating here? It's hard to believe that Maria didn't know that you were a convict and that you ran away with her son. The police officer was walking imposingly around the yard and telling off the women. Did he guess to let them know who he was harboring? Of course he did. I guess he just didn't need the extra paperwork, and he didn't put them on the case. Sarah and Maria signed the papers and they were let go, and Archie was taken away. Sarah stayed with Maria and told her about her son. Archie asked for it when they took him away. Grandma cried for a long time, but tried to pull herself together. I knew this would happen. I could feel it. I just thought they'd kill him in prison. But you see how. At home, I went on the internet to find out who Betty was. The one Archie supposedly killed. She found it. She was shocked. That's why she hadn't heard from her ex-husband in so long. Turns out he had married a wealthy heiress named Betty. He was the same husband who had accused Archie of murder. Sarah couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense in her mind. John hadn't left medicine, even though he'd become the owner of everything his wife's family had once owned. He combines being head of the department and also running his late wife's perfume business. Envious and a widower. That evening, Sarah went out on the balcony and lit a cigarette. She hadn't done that in a very long time. She started when she found out about John's cheating, gave it up. She didn't know if her ex-husband was capable of the crime, but she felt in her heart that Archie certainly didn't do it. He looked at her with eyes like he really was a saint, but who knew what had really happened there. Curiosity was eating away at her, and Sarah decided to meet John in person. But how would she do that? And whether he knew that she was involved in Archie's escape? She decided to visit the man in prison first. Though she went to see him, she was only allowed to talk to Archie through the prison bars for 5 minutes. I want to ask you, did you really not kill Betty? Asked Sarah. Archie, who was very excited about the arrival of the men, shook his head. No, just because she was my landlady paid me. I had a roof over my head. I was adopted at 16. Then I ran away. The family was just awful. They only needed payments. That's not why they took adult children from the orphanage. So I didn't get an apartment. Biddy was the first person who was nice to me in my life. But she was older, and I didn't think of her as a woman. There was absolutely no reason for me to kill her, Archie replied. Sarah nodded. I get it. I believe you. Is what the officer said yesterday true? Were you related to Betty? He asked further. No, I'm John's ex-wife. He gave his last name to both me and his wife, Sarah explained. Archie was surprised. How did you live with him? He's a disgusting man. Sarah shrugged her shoulders. Archie reached out through the bars, and Sarah touched her hand. Thank you for everything. Be happy, Archie told her, and a tear glistened in his eye. Damn, I think I'm into you. He didn't get to finish his sentence. They were interrupted by a member of the colony staff moving toward the exit. She left. At home, Sarah found John's old number in her address book. Is he still working? She thought, calling him. Hello, she heard on the other end. Hello, John. It's Sarah. I'd like to see you if you don't mind. Sarah, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't even expect it. What happened? John replied, pleased by her call. Sarah suspected that he was conservative enough not to forget her. Then she could find out the truth. There is nothing. Or rather, it happened. I was assisting what turned out to be a fugitive criminal. I was told that this man killed your wife and ran away. I didn't know anything about it, thought I'd call to offer my condolences and just ask, how are you doing? Maybe you need some support? She decided not to go dark. The closer to the truth a lie is, the harder it is to unravel. John was happy to get her call. John was happy to get her call and set up a meeting. Of course, she didn't expect him to spill everything right away. Sarah remembered that she had the best dress and that she was actually a beautiful woman, not just a doctor. Memories of Archie gave her confidence. He wanted to tell her that he was in love with her. It was obvious, and that thought warmed Sarah. She put on her earrings, remembering how she had held his hand. Archie is younger than she is, so what? If he wasn't guilty and she could figure it out, she could ask for a retrial. Maybe John had slipped up on some detail that hadn't made it to trial. All that mattered was making sure Archie wasn't guilty. Sarah believed that. But a little doubt remained, of course. The meeting took place at a nice establishment where Sarah and John ordered dinner. He was charming, and Sarah acted a little reserved. It was impossible to show him complete affection. He would have suspected something wrong. After all, they had known each other for a long time. And how have you been living all this time? He asked, looking her in the eye. Sarah shrugged and took the champagne away. I've been living like everyone else. I never met the man of my dreams, she said. And then she thought of Archie. She was haunted, but I guess the heart wants what the heart wants. And I got married. As you know, I was probably looking for a replacement, but I couldn't find one. My wife was younger than me. She was a floozy, had an affair with the gardener. He killed her out of jealousy. I was tortured with her, and I didn't know how you felt when I cheated on you. It all boomeranged back on me, as you can see. But I learned my lesson. Forgive me, Sarah smiled. Who's to speak of old times? They drank more champagne, and then more. John was about to invite her in. Sarah was well aware of that look in his eye. But she beat him to it. You know, I've got to go. That's how I work at the emergency room, after all. Frustration glittered in the mist. Well, I'm sorry the evening is over. You know, for the first time in a long time, I really took my mind off all my problems and worries. Thank you. Maybe we can do it again sometime. He put his hand on Sarah's arm, and she mechanically yanked it away. Then she was embarrassed and looked into his eyes. It's hard to get used to us having a quiet conversation like this again. Sarah realized she had tugged her hand in vain. He shouldn't realize that what she needed from him wasn't at all what he thought. It's okay. I hurt you, but I'm willing to make it up to you. And it's not nice what happened to the apartment either. But I don't need the money now. It's not like it was at the beginning. I'm back on my feet and I'm standing on my feet, and my feelings for you haven't gone away. You can't forget everything that's happened. You and my greatest love. Let's see each other again, at least just as friends. After all, we had a good time that night. I've changed? Sarah smiled and nodded. Okay, you're right. There's been stuff, but there's also stuff that's good that can't be forgotten. Call me when you want to see me. It'll be quicker than you think, he promised. Sarah looked at him and could not believe that he'd become a murderer. Had he really killed Betty for her money, or out of jealousy, or maybe it wasn't his fault? The evening left more questions than answers. Sarah went to bed confused. The next 3 days passed as usual. Ambulance patients. The driver bragged about being vigilant and calling the police. There you are, Sarah. And you didn't realize you were dealing with a dangerous fugitive criminal. But I figured it out and called. Not for nothing, as it turns out. I got a commendation, by the way, for assisting in the capture of the criminal. They even put my name in the paper. He was proud. Sarah nodded and thought to herself, I should kill you for your vigilance. She still didn't understand why she believed Archie so much. It was her primal instinct. As soon as she saw him for the first time, she knew he wasn't guilty. He wasn't the killer. John called in the evening as Sarah was just coming out of work. Turn around, he said. She turned and saw him in a suit with a huge bouquet of pink roses. Sarah smiled and walked over to him. The same ones I gave you when I was young, remember? He asked. Sarah nodded. I'd like to take you to a place I frequent. It's very beautiful there. Sarah wanted to say that she was tired, that she needed a shower. She needed to change after work, but instead she smiled and nodded. John drove her up the mountain, which offered a panoramic view of the city. The windows of the dorm I used to live in. Remember visiting me there with oranges? He asked. Sarah really got into the atmosphere. She nodded. John had thought of everything. He had brought a simple dinner with him, the shawarma she loved so much, and wine. Sarah decided she could go a little further this time, and asked the big question, she said. When John had already had a decent drink, she quietly began to bring up the right subject. Tell me about your ex-wife. What was she like? She was such a quiet person, but proud. If she was offended, she wouldn't talk to me for days. Her silence was killing me. You know, our fights were so emotional. They were real. It wasn't like that with her. And how did you know she was having an affair with the gardener? I mean, it was obvious. You know, when I asked her directly about it and she didn't say anything, didn't even bother to answer. And I was her husband. We started fighting. It was a creepy time. Sarah nodded. Archie was telling me that, according to the case file, John didn't see her that night and didn't fight with her at all. That's the first bell, Sarah said, and poured John more wine. She expected him to confess to the murder, but he didn't. That evening, he took her home and kissed her goodbye. She had to let him do it for believability, but she wouldn't let him go any further. The next meeting was at his house. Sarah was creepy to be there. It seemed the ghost of the murdered Betty was about to come around the corner. They drank wine, poured again, and more for John than for herself. Again, she broached the same subject. This time she prepared herself and turned on the recorder on her phone. It worked all evening, capturing every word. You know, your story makes it sound like that gardener really did steal your wife. What a thing to say. You give a man a job, a place to live, and he treats you like that, Sarah said. John looked at her questioningly. How do you know about housing? I didn't tell you that. Sarah nodded. Yeah, I found that out from a policeman. He told me that that convict lived in the rich man's house. She was very believable. But did John believe her? Sarah thought she wouldn't want to be another one of John's sweethearts who walk out of that house through the window. They were just on the second floor. John was seriously drunk by the end of the evening. Sarah asked him to show her the house. And this is the very window that Betty fell out of. You know, we had a terrible fight then. I didn't want to push her. I was drunk, mad at her. Suddenly he realized he'd said too much. That's okay, I think she deserved it. Sarah realized she'd heard the main thing. The phone in her bag. Suddenly there was a voice notification in the silence. Recorder memory full. Recording stopped. John cast a cursory glance at her. He understood everything, realized he had blabbed. She was recording their conversation. Sarah didn't wait for him to throw her out the same window. She dashed forward down the stairs. John ran after her. Wait. You've got it all wrong. He ran after her and managed to grab her. They both fell down the stairs. Sarah was badly bruised, but John was hurt worse, hitting his head on the step and lying motionless. At that moment, her heart was breaking. As it was, she was a doctor and couldn't just run away, leaving him here. Her conscience tormented her for just a few seconds. What the hell? Am I going to call him an ambulance and the police? She thought and ran away. Was he alive? Was she alive? Would she not be accused of killing him? If so, would she see Archie in jail? Oddly. After all, it would be a women's colony. All these thoughts were born in her mind as she walked briskly toward the road. It wasn't until she caught a cab that she calmed down a bit. She called the police from the car and told them everything. He fell down the stairs. You can hear everything on the tape. I'll bring it to you now. Call him an ambulance. I don't know what's wrong with him. We can't send an ambulance until we've seen the tape with the evidence. John is a very powerful man. You can't just arrest him. Sarah brought the tape and John was arrested, but already in the hospital he had a concussion. When the ambulance arrived, he had a concussion. When the ambulance arrived, he had already regained consciousness and was trying to call the police. With the good news, Sarah arrived at Archie's house. Your case will be reviewed. I'm sure you'll be released, she said. Archie glowed. Sarah told him the whole story, how she had gotten the information from John, and how he had confessed to her, how she had almost become his new victim. I don't even know how to thank you. You're my savior. A real angel, Sarah, he said, looking at her with loving eyes. She smiled at him. A few days later, Sarah was summoned to the station. John tried to bribe the investigator. The tape was supposedly lost. She realized it right away. I have a copy, she said. I have plenty of copies. The TV reporter has one of them. He was a classmate of mine. If they try to close the case, there will be a big backlash. The family of the murdered woman was not only known in our town. There will be a huge scandal. Heads will fly. Also, in case you haven't forgotten, an innocent man is in jail, Sarah said. The investigator frowned. Are you threatening me now? He asked. No. I'm saying I'll go further if I have to. I've done your job for you, brought the evidence. All you have to do is take them apart and put them in the file. And close it. Won't that get you one step closer to a new star on your shoulder straps? Sarah asked. The investigator was silent. You're free to go. We'll call you if we need to, he said. Sarah left the office and immediately sent a copy of the video to a good friend of hers, who actually worked as a correspondent for TV, but only in Moscow. She called back, and Sarah told the whole story. Yes, I wonder if I'll come and try to interview this investigator. That way he'll know that there's no way to hide and cover it up anymore. John did not get away with it. Other journalists joined in. The television news is all over the place. He was convicted as an innocent man. The husband killed his wife. While the hearing was going on at the hospital, where John worked as a supervisor, he was hastily fired retroactively. The court found him guilty of murder, given the dictaphone recording, and there was no way to disprove the guilt. So the lawyer advised John to confess. The confession went to all the newspapers. He made Betty look guilty, saying that she had thrown herself at him and tried to scratch his face with her hands, and that he had simply pushed her out of self-defense, and she had fallen out of an open window, losing her balance. John also insisted that Betty was having an affair with Archie. Sarah had visited Archie in prison until he was released. Was there an affair or not? She asked. It was embarrassing to admit, but she felt jealous. Feelings came over her and overwhelmed her. She had fallen in love with the handsome prisoner. I wasn't. Betty was deeply sympathetic to me, but not like that. It happens. You love a man with all your heart, but you can't picture him next to you. She grew up like a princess, the only daughter of rich parents, and I was in a room with 8 bunk beds. There were about 15 people in our group, and it was a game of survival. 2 of the boys didn't make it to adulthood. They were beaten there in a way that even in prisons you don't get beaten. The kids are very violent. Sarah, I'm sorry, what did I ask? It's none of my business, he said embarrassedly, and I wish it did concern me. I like you. You know, when I saw you in that basement in that white robe, I thought I was dead, and you were an angel coming down to me. You saved me, and I fell in love even then. It wasn't out of gratitude. I don't know how to explain it. I just knew from the first moment I saw you that I couldn't imagine myself as a friend. I don't feel the same way about you. Will you be my girlfriend? He asked. Sarah laughed. At my age, but you and I don't have such a big age difference. I'll try not to disappoint you. You know I have a lot of faults, but I'll never betray and I'll never lie. I can guarantee you that she was really looking forward to hugging Archie. She counted the days. Finally, the sentence was announced. John was given 4 years in prison, but given the extenuating circumstances, the clean confession, and the large bribe that had gone before the judge, it was impossible to acquit him. But John was promised by his lawyer that he would be released on parole. Archie was released in the courtroom, and the first thing he did was hug Sarah right there in front of John, who turned away from the happy couple in pain. The moment Archie and Sarah crossed the courthouse threshold, the bar slammed behind John in the car that was to take him to juvie. And there, those with whom Archie had once been incarcerated were already waiting for him. They promised that they would meet the man who had set him up with honors, so that he would not forget. Archie didn't ask for it. But even his worst enemies sided with him when he learned that Archie had been framed by some rich man. Sarah brought Archie back to her apartment. "This is how I live," she said. "It got awkward, of course. Thank you. Don't worry, I won't hit on you. We don't have to date at all. Let's start with friendship. I've heard that relationships that start with friendship are the strongest," Archie replied. "You asked me to be your girlfriend," Sarah reminded him. "I did, but you didn't say anything back," Archie said. "What else?" asked Sarah. "It's for the best, given the new circumstances." "I promise I won't hurt you," Archie assured her. He was afraid that people would look at him as a prisoner and would hide his jewels. But it wasn't like that at all. They had to get to know each other all over again. Sarah learned that Archie had had a girlfriend when he first got a job at his wife's house. They had dated for a few months, but she had cheated on him and confessed to him herself, asking for forgiveness. Said she'd made a mistake, but Archie didn't forgive her. Said it was impossible. It ruined love. He meant it, and she agreed with every word he said. They thought alike, saw the world alike. Sarah realized that she had found exactly the man she had been waiting for all her life. For being in jail for someone else's crime, Archie was well compensated. Enough money to buy a 2-bedroom apartment. That's how Archie and Sarah got their own place. He knew what John had done to her and put the apartment in his name. Sarah became its owner, and Archie was only a resident there. They visited Maria often, and she insisted that her son be reburied. Archie testified, and he was officially declared dead. Now his grave is in the city cemetery next to his father's grave. Maria visits him often, and Sarah and Archie don't let her pine for him alone. At first they came to visit her, and then they started calling her to their place. You are like family to us. We really want you to live with us. After all, the age here and the hospitals are closer, and I will be close by, persuaded Sarah. I do not like apartments. I do not want to live here. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'll just visit. I'm all alone now. Of course, we will visit, and soon we will bring our grandson. Sarah smiled and put her hand to her tummy. What? Aren't you pregnant? Maria asked, smiling. Yes, Sarah brightened. We're expecting a baby. We just don't know yet who will be born. But you promised to be godmother. Archie and I have no immediate family. Just you. Well, if that's what you decide, I will, Maria replied, smiling. All through her pregnancy, it was hard to breathe exhaust fumes. She used to throw up a lot. But as soon as she came to Maria's private sector, she felt better. Sarah's boss himself insisted that she take sick leave and go to a place where she didn't vomit every 5 minutes. Thankfully, Maria was only too happy. They moved in temporarily with Archie. He did all the men's chores and chores around the house. Something had been missing for a long time. He straightened out the fence, rebuilt the roof, painted the walls. Sarah even helped around the house, and Maria talked about her life and her sicknesses. It was good to have someone I knew with a medical background. When Sarah and Archie's daughter was born, she was named Ava, and Maria became her godmother and even stayed at their apartment for a few weeks to help the young mother. Archie went to school and got a security guard's degree. He found a good job in the city. Except the shifts were day and night, and Maria helped the young mother with the baby. Then she went to her place, but even there she did not have time to get bored. Archie planted and dug up the garden, and she spun jars for him. After all, he had become like a son to her, and Sarah, who was like a daughter to her. And she put the jar in the same basement where Sarah and the same basement where Sarah and Archie first met. Thank you for reading the story to the end. If you like the story, please support me with a thumbs up button. It means a lot to me. Have a good day.